All right. Well, Tracy, I know all of this is like developing around us as we are talking. It is Saturday night at 8 p.m. And so the news just broke a few minutes ago as we're recording this. But what's your first instinct, your first reaction to this news? Right decision, dangerous decision? Where do you come down on this, given all of your expertise?
I think that's kind of the key, Teresa, right? Is that it's given my expertise. So Iran has been a country that I have been warning about since 2000, which was when I started actually at the CIA. I have always found them to be basically the access and number one funder of terror around the world. And so, in my opinion, letting them get to the point that they were relatively close to enriching uranium, we knew that in about 2009, and not doing anything about it was deeply concerning. So I do support these kind of surgical strikes, I guess, if you will. Now, the question is of constitutionality surrounding them obviously comes up. So I'm not sure that I necessarily support the way it was done, but I do actually support striking Iran.
Tell me about strategy here. What was America trying to accomplish? And I know we don't know yet exactly what all might have been dismantled, but tell me what the strategy would have been going into this tonight.
I believe our strategy, and this is really what I've said for the past few weeks, was going to be to try to either completely dismantle or significantly hinder their nuclear program to the point that it would take them decades upon decades to ever build that back up. I think that was our number one target because, in my opinion, we're sort of, I guess, leaving the rest, if you will, to Israel because it's their nuclear program that seems to be the most direct threat to us, to the US, because they have said that we are part of a group of people that they would like to eliminate. And so I think that's why we went for the nuclear program specifically and nothing else.
I think there might be people at home who have sort of dipped in and out. They've started hearing about this and they don't really understand everything surrounding it and all of the layers that are there. So, if you had to give us sort of a high school education level of sort of how we got to where we are today, how would you explain to somebody? You just said you've considered Iran perhaps the biggest threat to America. How did we get to this place?
I mean, gosh, we could go all the way back to 1979, right? But I don't want to go that far with the Ayatollah, obviously, in the fall of the Shah and that regime, to basically this idea that Iran basically perceived the West, if you will, and anything acting as an outreach of the West as their number one threat that needed to be eliminated. As such, Iran, in very indirect ways, quite frankly, through the funding of groups like terrorist groups like Hezbollah, through the funding of groups like the Houthis or Hamas, has actually waged war on the West for decades. I think people just haven't realized that and made that connection because that's what Iran wants, quite frankly, in the long run, so that they won't be attacked and that they can continue to do what they're doing. So I think that's kind of the quick overview in terms of what's been going on.
Do you worry about retaliation in any form or fashion? Because I know there's been some concern that, there might be people already positioned in America. So where do you come down on that as far as the threat that we now face because of the action that was taken?
There's no question that there will be retaliation. I was on News Nation last night actually discussing that. And I discussed that very much on my open social media as well, where I do talk about policy. There is no question that there will be retaliation, but I don't think it just looks like what we call sleeper cells. And I want to be honest, I don't like that word. They're terrorists. That's what they are. We're kind of romanticizing them by calling them that. But I do think a lot of this is going to also look cyber. I think we forget about Iran's cyber capabilities. They have decent cyber capabilities. They have gone after us before. They've gone after denial of service attacks on Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase. I mean, big companies. I mean, we also have to remember too, it's 16 million passwords were hacked just a few days ago here in the U.S. And so we are very, very vulnerable in terms of our critical infrastructure to cyber attacks. I also think there's individuals here, we have seen that in two assassination attempts that were thwarted against President Trump that were ordered by the IRGC in Iran of individuals who were already here, who were sympathetic to them and sympathetic to their cause. That's going to look more like lone wolf attacks, things like what we saw in New Orleans, for example, on New Year's Day. So I think those are kind of the two ways that we're going to be impacted by that.
A couple more questions for you, Tracy. If you could put yourself, in the situation room, what are the types of things that you would be guiding the president through, guiding his team through? Just because, as I said it as we started, you have such deep expertise. What are the types of things you would be making sure that they are considering as they move forward?
So my expertise isn't in the military, right? It's in, intelligence and national security. So obviously that's where my, I guess, recommendations would be more towards. I do think what I would say is I don't want this war to expand. In my opinion, I think that these three strikes were for the most part, justified. I don't want to see us waging a full out war, kind of, I guess, along the lines of Iraq, right? What we saw in the early 2000s. I don't necessarily want to see that. I think it needs to be measured, and we need to be holding back, in my opinion. Also, though, what I'm hearing a lot, which it's not that it's frustrating me, it's just we're very focused on what repercussions might be to American interests overseas, which is a very real thing. We absolutely have to protect our service members, there's no question. But there's been almost zero discussion about what repercussions and blowback could be here to the United States. And so I would just really want to make sure that someone is advising them. And that's not to say just because there are repercussions or could be repercussions that we shouldn't do something. But we really need to be taking those into consideration. I'm just concerned it's not being talked about enough.
So show restraint as we move forward, maybe consider the fact that we've done what we set out to do and just show restraint as we move forward.
That's pretty much exactly how I feel. We have taken out the threat that we have identified, which was them, being close to having a nuclear weapon. And I've said this for 20 years that they've been close to having a nuclear weapon. So we've done that. I think we have significantly impacted that ability, and I think it probably needs to stop there, in my opinion. Now, if Israel wants to further engage, they are by all means entitled to defend themselves, do whatever needs to be done. But I think our impact really needs an involvement, needs to probably stop there.
I think the final question for you, Tracy, is I know I even saw, I believe President Trump posted, that now's the time for negotiation, now's the time for peace. Do you believe that is possible? Do you believe that it's possible for America to negotiate with Iran, given everything that's just happened in the last 2 weeks?
I'm going to say that with somewhat of a smile on my face, absolutely not. And I even, when this first started and President Trump was engaging in, I'm going to put discussions with Iran because I said that there's no way they're going to come to the table. I was 100% right. I mean, this is a group I've known a lot about for a long time. They're not a group who engages in negotiations. They never have, they never will, and they never do so in good faith. And so I don't think even after doing this that they're going to come to the table. I don't. I know that that seems hopeless. I just don't see them doing that.
I lied. I have a follow up. Is there anything that we as Americans need to be doing right now to be on alert or protecting ourselves? Because you talked about the vulnerabilities. Is there anything you would suggest that we be thinking of or doing?
So I do think another thing I didn't say in terms of pushback, I apologize, Teresa, was my brain is
You've been through a lot.
the Strait of Hormuz, which it's 26% of the world's oil supply does come through there. And so I don't know what Iran's going to do. I know Israel earlier today took out a radar system there. So I don't know what Iran's going to do with that. They can't shut it down, but they can make it extremely difficult and almost dangerous to pass through. So I would recommend, individuals keeping their eye on oil prices, oil supply, those kinds of things. I also, too, and again, on the heels of this hack of the 18 billion passwords, change your passwords. Change your passwords on all of your personal devices. I know it's annoying. I know that it's frustrating, but taking a couple hours out of your day or an hour out of your day to do that, in my opinion, is going to really save you in the long run. Those are just very minor things that we can be doing.
As a great recommendation, and one I'll probably take you up on tomorrow when I am off. So